a disaster quietly descends, and by the time people realize it, it's too late to stop. Survivors begin fighting each other for resources, for survivors are heading towards a safe place they have in mind. Brian, the eldest brother, is driving, with his younger brother Danny sitting in the back. Brian's girlfriend Bobby is in the passenger seat, and Danny's girlfriend Kate is beside him. At the start of the virus outbreak, Brian volunteered to bury and burn bodies. As the most experienced among the four, he established 3 rules. 1. Avoid infected individuals at all costs, as their breath is highly contagious. 2. Anything touched by an infected person must be disinfected within 24 hours. 3. There is no cure for this virus. Anyone who doesn't follow the rules will eventually perish. A car blocks their path, and upon seeing this, Brian quickly closes all the windows. The man slowly approaches their car. He has run out of gas and wants to trade some food. But in this situation, gasoline is obviously more valuable. Although Brian clearly refuses, the man continues to approach the car. At that moment, Kate notices a girl in the man's car who appears sick. The next second, Brian urgently steers the car to the side of the road. He will not have any contact with an infected person. The man can only watch as Brian and the others drive away. Due to the intense driving earlier, the car's oil filter is damaged. Now, they must make a decision. Danny suggests returning to talk with the woman they just saw. Their car is still usable, but Kate disagrees, saying it's too dangerous. In this wilderness, where the temperature fluctuates drastically between day and night, their situation won't be much better. Eventually, they return to the location where the man was, carrying gasoline. Brian plans to take it directly by force, but it's clear that the man in front of them won't let them do that so easily. His name is Frank. Last week, he received a radio transmission from a school in the Farmington suburbs. The CDC set up an emergency medical base there and developed the latest serum. People from all over the country are rushing there. But to Brian, it sounds like a fairy tale. Frank has no other requests. He just wants to get himself and his daughter there. Later, Danny and Bobby use plastic wrap and sealing tape to make a simple isolation space and thoroughly disinfect the car. They then gather their supplies and head towards their destination. Inside the car, aside from the little girl playing games and Bobby, everyone is lost in thought, feeling incredibly tense. To break the silence, Brian cracks a joke, but Bobby slaps him twice, hard. This action causes the car to lose control, and Brian slams on the brakes, but the inertia causes Frank to press his hand against the plastic wrap. Fortunately, Kate uses her face to support it, preventing the simple isolation from tearing. Once the car stops, Kate gets out without hesitation, already on edge. Kate is now even more frightened. Brian vents his anger on Frank. Kate ignores Danny, her gaze fixed ahead, and Danny also looks into the distance. There, a car is parked, and the two brothers immediately rush over. They need to stock up on gasoline, but the gas cap is locked. Danny opens the driver's door and finds a severely infected corpse inside. After preparing everything, Danny reaches into the keyhole near the steering wheel, but, in his nervousness, he drops the key onto the floor. As he bends down to pick it up, a low growl sounds behind him. Danny slowly turns his head, and the next moment, the corpse in the driver's seat opens its eyes. Their eyes meet, and Danny feels like his heart will stop. After closing the door, he slowly recovers from the shock. The next day, they finally reach Farmington, but it's not the bustling place they imagined. Apart from the ruined city, there is only silence and the remnants of a forgotten past. Soon, they arrive at the emergency center mentioned in the radio transmission. Frank decides to leave his daughter in the car by herself. Seeing this, Bobby chooses to stay with the little girl.
Look, now is not the time, okay?
The girls need some alone time to talk about boys.
Brian knows his girlfriend well and reminds Bobby not to have any contact with the girl. Of course, he trusts that Bobby isn't foolish enough to ignore this advice. The four of them quickly arrive at the school gymnasium, where they find simple isolation beds set up everywhere. A person in a white coat is making something. Frank learns from the person that the place has already fallen. Before they arrived, the entire emergency center was down to him and a few kids. And there's no serum here, just a drug that can delay the virus for 3 days. But in the man's eyes, this is just a way to extend the suffering of the patients. The entire town has run out of gasoline. They've used it all for electricity. 2 weeks ago, the center lost its last power supply. Seeing no hope, he decided to peacefully end things with the children. As the white cloth is closed, Kate continuously pleads for him to stop. But Brian knows this is the best outcome. They don't need to endure more suffering. Frank, seeing no hope for his daughter, refuses to admit the truth. He wants to stop the man and demands Brian hand over the gun. Brian refuses, but Danny, taking advantage of his brother's distraction, grabs the gun and gives it to Frank. He repeatedly asks Frank to stop, but the man doesn't care. His time is almost up. If Frank wants to accompany him, that's fine. The rest of the children can be left with them. Frank is helpless and, in the end, puts down the gun. Sometimes, life is just a painful death. The man's words echo in his ears. Before Frank leaves, he returns the handgun to Brian, but an emergency arises outside. The girl is showing signs of oxygen deprivation, pointing toward an oxygen tank. Seeing this, Bobby quickly puts on a mask and gloves. She couldn't just stand by and watch the girl fade away. Due to the angle, she had to lower her hand that was covering the mask to give the child oxygen. But the next moment, blood splattered from the girl's mouth onto Bobby's face. At that moment, Frank had already come out of the building. A terrified Bobby quickly restored the isolation film and wiped the blood off her body, taking off her blood-stained coat. She had to stay calm. She couldn't let the others know about this, or they would have to leave the group. The girl then told her father that she wanted to go to the bathroom, but Frank knew that if they both got out of the car, Brian might very well leave them behind. Frank hoped his daughter would go to the nearby public restroom alone. The child was very understanding. She agreed to her father's request. After Frank placed her on the ground, the girl slowly dragged her weak body forward, but the next moment, she collapsed to the ground. Frank kept apologizing to his daughter, deciding to take her over himself. He then turned to Danny and said, "You're a good man," before turning and walking away. Seeing this, Brian quickly went to the trunk and threw the father and daughter's belongings out of the car. Danny rushed forward, asking Frank to return to the car, but he didn't stop. Kate silently returned to the car. Brian told his brother to get in the car immediately, but his conscience told him that he couldn't leave his father and daughter behind. There was nothing left here, but in Brian's mind, they had fulfilled their previous promise, and now they had to leave. But these words didn't convince Danny. This time, no one stood on Danny's side. As the engine roared to life, the girl turned to look at the car. Frank immediately refocused the child's attention. If the end was already determined, he was willing to wait for it with his daughter. After this incident, everyone felt a sense of guilt. While no one was paying attention, Bobby threw the infected coat under the car. She believed that just brief contact wouldn't infect her. Later, to relieve the tense atmosphere, Brian suggested they rest for the night at a nearby golf course. After a brief check, they began using distant glass as their target. Each shard shattered seemed to reduce their inner anxiety and restlessness. Soon, the glass ahead was empty. However, they were unaware that in a room somewhere, there were all the supplies they needed. That night, Kate went to the phone, hoping they could still use it. Kate wanted to contact her parents. It was also her motivation. However, an unhappy Bobby appeared in front of Kate, criticizing her for constantly calling and trying to crush Kate's hope with words. This made Kate feel that the woman before her was unreasonable. No one had provoked her, yet she came over to attack others. Unaware of this, Brian was hitting a bottle on the grass. He had always played the villain, though it was for survival. The guilt still lingered. Meanwhile, Danny wanted to know why Kate was upset, but she didn't want to talk about it. At this point, a beam of light appeared ahead, clearly not from their team. The two immediately turned and ran. After venting, Brian had drunk enough. As they were about to go to sleep, they noticed a truck parked in the distance. Brian quietly sneaked over. There was someone patrolling ahead. As Brian secretly watched, he caused a disturbance with the truck's horses. The person immediately became alert. Just as the patroller appeared, Brian knocked him to the ground. He wanted to know who these people were and why they were here. As he removed the person's mask, more people walked out of the building, and Danny and the others became hostages. This group had been living there a few days ago. They went out to gather supplies, and just returned to find intruders. At the same time, one of their people had disappeared. They believed the four of them killed him. In the end, they found the guard's body in the pool at the golf course. Seeing this, the others believed the infection had already taken hold before they left. After clearing their names, the four of them were kicked out. As Brian and the others were about to leave, someone changed their mind. They wanted to keep the two women. However, the leader of the group disagreed with his man. They weren't like that, but the others couldn't stand their hopeless existence. They needed to keep Bobby and Kate. The leader hadn't expected to be betrayed by his own men. They demanded that the two women take off their coats so they could check for infection, which made Kate and Bobby feel humiliated but helpless. Brian couldn't stand the scene and decided to fight back. The leader, who had just been betrayed, had no objection. At that moment, Everyone recoiled in horror. Bobby had been infected. Brian stared in shock. He was speechless as the four of them were kicked out. As they got closer to their destination, they began to fall apart. On the way, Brian remained silent, while Danny seemed lost in thought. Kate tried to stay as far away from Bobby as possible, and her gaze made Bobby uncomfortable. Kate saw the girl's fading handprint, which sent a chill down her spine. Meanwhile, their fuel was running low, and the road ahead seemed even more uncertain. Soon, Brian found a gas station. When they got out of the car, Kate stared at the phone in front of her. This time, she didn't try to make the call. After yesterday's events, Kate knew she needed to change. She found Danny. Looking at the memorial items on the ground, Kate suggested they get rid of Bobby, but this had to be something Danny discussed with Brian. It was their rule, otherwise, everyone would be killed by Bobby. No way to refuel. They chose to leave here. After returning to the highway, Brian stopped the car. There were still 2 miles to Newville. Bobby could walk the rest of the way. This harsh reality, she had to face it. Bobby wanted to ask the other two for help, but Danny and Kate remained silent, quietly waiting for the situation to unfold. Bobby kept pleading with Brian to let her stay, saying she could sit in the back of the car, just like Frank and his daughter before, while denying she was infected, repeatedly insisting it was just a bruise. Brian left her some supplies, as there was still food and water in the town that Bobby could use, but even at this point, Bobby still wouldn't tell the truth. This finally caused Brian, who had been holding back, to explode. This was her choice, and she had to bear the consequences. Bobby, still holding onto a sliver of hope, thought Brian was just scaring her, but as the car slowly drove away, she finally realized that everything was real. Inside the car, Danny and Kate returned to their usual demeanor. The car was about to run out of fuel, and the remaining journey might have to be done on foot. Kate repeatedly asked, "What should we do? What should we do?" But Danny had no answers either. Just then, a car appeared ahead. Seeing this, Kate suggested they should ask the car to stop. Danny thought they should politely ask for help. Brian, already in a bad mood, became more agitated by the chatter between the two. He stepped on the gas and sped toward the car. Just as they were about to collide, Brian swerved the car to block the road. He was about to get out but was stopped by Danny. He wanted to try talking to them amicably. The situation was very similar to when Frank had met them. The two women in the car warned Danny not to get close. Everyone needed to gather more gas. No one knew when they might need to move, but his sweet words didn't work at this moment. The other car didn't want to get involved and decided to turn around and leave. In the next moment, Brian shot at the car, killing the driver instantly. Danny rushed forward to stop his brother, but it had no effect. Brian didn't expect the woman in the passenger seat to have a gun, which shot straight through his kneecap. After dealing with them, Brian finally let out a sigh of relief. Danny couldn't believe his brother could do something so inhumane. Watching Kate go to get the gas, he angrily asked her what she was doing. When he didn't get a response, he turned his anger on Brian. He no longer wanted to be told what to do by his brother. As the older brother, Brian didn't care. He didn't want to deal with Danny, but Danny's incessant complaints made Brian furious. He needed to make things clear to his younger brother. Looking at his useless but morally upright brother, Brian's anger grew. Danny just stood there, quietly observing everything, and then began to criticize. Since he hadn't done anything himself, he felt justified in judging his brother from a moral high ground. Brian had been the one to pull Bobby out, but the instigator just sat by and acted as if nothing had happened. After hearing this, Danny finally calmed down and began to treat his brother's wounds. At that moment, Danny realized that Brian had already been infected. Looking at Brian's expression and movements, Brian knew his fate. Danny looked at the gun on the driver's seat, and Brian saw everything. Maybe because of his leg injury, Brian's condition worsened that night. He was in a delirious state, while Danny focused entirely on the gun in his hands. Kate, sitting quietly beside them, waited for Brian to fall asleep. Once she saw the moment had come, she immediately reminded Danny to act quickly. They had to get rid of the burden while Brian was still unconscious. The two quietly approached Brian and easily took the gun from his hand. They also found the car keys in his pocket. Just as they were about to get in the car and leave, Brian suddenly stood up. Seeing this, the two rushed to the car, trying to escape, only to realize that the real car keys were in Brian's hand. This was all part of his plan, a test, and also the final outcome. Danny now had two choices: either take Brian with him, or give him a final ride. Danny looked at his older brother, hoping he would follow the rules, but Brian didn't care. He knew his brother wouldn't take him, so he only wanted an escape. Watching him get closer, Danny finally pulled the trigger. The next morning, the two set off on their own journey. From then on, They would live together until the virus disappeared or they perished. They were like birds in the sky, free to live in this pure land, enjoying a life without disturbances, with plenty to eat and wear. Danny came alone to the beach, where memories of him and Brian floated in his mind like pictures. Those were the shared memories between them, so beautiful, filled with happiness and joy. But everything was gone. Brian would never appear on this beach again.